right, welcome back to the Liminal Living podcast bonus episodes where we are diving through the book of James. I'm using my sermon notes from my church on Sunday, kind of recasting them here. And these are unfundamentalist Bible studies because how these passages have been used in the past have been very weaponized and by certain people who got to make rules and enforce rules. But as I was talking with someone today, they said that, they were in a very rules-based church growing up, and it all fell apart because their whole rules was we don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't watch rated R movies. And then he shows up at one of his pastor's house and sees the movie Terminator right there on his thing. He's like preaching that we can't do this stuff, and there it is right there. So the people who get to make the rules often wield them, but not necessarily always adhere to them. And they use especially the epistles, because the epistles can sound really fiery because they're very do this, don't do this kind of stuff. So we're trying to pull that out of the book of James, put it back into its context. It still gets a little fiery, still gets a little critical, but if we put it back in its context, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. So this is chapter 3. We're following the liturgical calendar, so we got verses 1 through 12 on this week. And this one, I've almost heard this one like two different sermons, but they're two different topics when they're two different sermons. It's talking about controlling the tongue, controlling speech, controlling your language, and kind of, that youth, the youth groupie person that, I was back in my teenage days. I heard countless sermons about means that we shouldn't cuss and we shouldn't gossip and we shouldn't do all these things, like control your tongue, only say nice things, all that kind of stuff. But it opens up with a passage that is right on the front end. It says, "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly." It's like, and then it goes into y'all should control your tongue kind of a thing. And it's like, what in the world's going on here? It seems like that's like verse 1, and then it seems like verses 2 through whatever, 12, is its own sermon for its own thoughts. But James here is building in a letter, an epistle, almost like he's writing a paper for college. It's not like you can just, put a whole bunch of disconnected arguments in a paper and submit it and get an A. Like he's actually building something, he's creating something, there's an audience, there's a context. And if you remember, like last week, we talked about the people with gold rings on their hands were the Epicureans, the people in like Roman political positions locally. They're the ones with gold rings and fancy clothes, and it's like, don't make distinctions. If someone like that walks into your church, your synagogue, these are Jewish Christians, Jewish Messianic Christians. And if they walk into your synagogue, and you say, "Oh, come have a seat up here," and then a poor person comes in with dirty clothes and they're looking disheveled, you say, "You go stand at the back or sit at my feet." You're making distinctions, and in like a society that the class system, the caste system, the sect system was like really a big deal. That was very radical and disrupted the Roman way of life. And there was a lot of persecution going around because you'd be in like a church setting and a slave can serve communion. And that was just like, no, we thought that was only for the privileged few kind of a thing. And a slave could actually receive communion being served to him from like an Epicurean. And that was also like a radical thing. Like, you're serving me right now. This is really odd. I've never experienced that before in my life. So when it says that not many of you should seek to become teachers in the church because those who teach will be judged more strictly, it has to be put back into that social construct, the caste system that says people who wear fancy clothes and have the gold ring, you come and sit up front. Now, what seat is up front but the Moses seat in a synagogue? And that's where the teacher is going to sit. Now, we kind of do it backwards in our churches, and I don't mean backwards as in like wrong. I just mean backwards as in like reversed, where the teacher stands and everyone else who's listening to a teaching sits down. And in a synagogue in, the ancient Near East, it's going to be the opposite. The person who's teaching is going to sit down, especially in a Moses seat in a synagogue. And then the people listening are going to stay standing. That's just kind of how it worked. So whenever it says, and then Jesus sat down, opened his mouth, and then began to teach them, like that is like a Jewish idiom for he's taking a place of authority to sit down and teach authoritatively about some things. So taking a seat is kind of a big deal. Now, when normally in a culture like this, if you had a position of influence, teacher, politician, elected official, something that you're higher up in society, it comes with a lot of kickbacks. You're seen, you have more authority to speak into people's lives. You're able to receive bribes and, do all this stuff. And it says, when he says, dear brothers and sisters, you shouldn't seek to become a teacher. It's not talking about any of you who is like, I would like to go into teaching and teach children math. Like, we're not talking about that kind of teaching. Or, somebody who wants to become a pastor and they're like, I would like to, teach the Bible to people. And so it's not necessarily even talking about that. I've heard this, when I'm going to seminary, is like, well, you got to be careful because not many people should become teachers because you'll be judged more harshly and more strictly. So you got to be careful. You got to be on your guard all the time. And my nervous system's reactive all the time. Not really talking about that. Saying don't seek positions of influence for the kickbacks that are going to come your way. Don't seek to use your words to manipulate a crowd of people for your own benefit. That's really where it's coming here. Don't just seek to be an influencer to get all of the money. And this is an upside down value because people sought positions out because it was going to come with all the kickbacks and the glory and all this stuff. But James is like, we're going to switch that around. Don't be after all of those positions of teaching and authority because you can use your words to manipulate people. And in a world where power equals privilege, he's saying seek service and seek equality, which is a really big thing. And then James goes on to say, we're all going to make mistakes. Indeed, we all make mistakes. But if we can control our tongues, we would be perfect and could control ourselves in every way. We can make a large horse go which way we want to go just by a small bit that goes in his mouth. And a small little rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot wants to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue, what we say, is a small thing that can make grand speeches. Now, these grand speeches, what is actually going on? That's kind of like you're showing all of your information. You're showing off all that you know. You're showing off. Have you heard the term, that person is all talk? That's the grand speeches. The tongue can make grand speeches, impress people, manipulate people, and then reap the benefits on the other side. People in power who pursue positions of those authority for the kickbacks and for the ability to manipulate a group of people to give them things and get benefits from things, saying that is a very powerful and dangerous thing. And people like that are going to face stricter scrutiny. They're going to be, held up to a magnifying glass a whole lot more than, somebody who doesn't have that position. Charisma is a really compelling steering wheel that can steer groups of people. It can steer, charisma in an individual can be dangerous because you can steer small communities and groups of people in ways that are very manipulative to them and beneficial to the person who is teaching them. And kind of in our church structures today, we're seeing a lot of that, where pastors are being found out for embezzlement of funds or abusing minors and women and all these things. And they're using their charisma, they're using their ability to move a crowd, move an audience, and steer them for personal benefit. So charisma is this steering wheel that requires a lot of self-knowledge and humility in order to use for common good. Because people who have charisma, it's not bad that you have it. It's just you need a lot more self-knowledge about how am I using this? What is this for? Am I reaping all these benefits at the expense of other people, kind of a thing? Because we can make the grand speeches and the grand, this says grand exploits is a word. We can, puff out our resume and show all this great things and be all talk and no delivery. And people that are all talk and no delivery. Charisma can deceive yourself. Charisma can deceive other people. And an unwillingness to see, that is a very dangerous thing in communities and peoples. Our words can shape perceptions, but actions reveal patterns of living. That's one thing that we gotta think about. Our words can shape another person's perspective, and how much of our words is actually just PR adjustment of how they perceive me, how they think about me. That's not what I intended. That's not what I meant. That's not what we always use our words to kind of shape people's perception of us. And people who have positions of power and influence, they do this in grand display where they'll be found out for having abused individuals, and then the focus goes from the individual, like they were abused and they were hurt and they are, traumatized. The focus doesn't go on to the person that they abused. The focus then gets soaked up by the person who has all the charisma. And it's like, oh yeah, I was wrong, but I'm going to fix it. I'm going to get better, and God's going to redeem me. And everyone forgets about the person who was hurt and abused and kicked to the side, and whatever happens to them, right? And so we need self-knowledge, and a good way to do that is ask the question, how do you experience me? Not just we tend to know ourselves in our hearts and judge ourselves by the intentions behind our words and actions, but people's experience of us and the actions themselves reveal patterns of living and patterns of behaving that probably need adjustment and correction. And our words shape people's perceptions of us, but to look at our actions and to ask people to describe to us, how do you experience me? That reveals the patterns of living that we need to actually look at. And you can actually look at figures that you look up to that have charisma and say, what are their patterns of living? Not just what can they say, not just, what are they charismatically able to communicate to folks, but what are the patterns of living? What are the patterns of living that are in this individual? What does that say about them? Not what they say about themselves or what they say about their intentions, but the actual patterns of their living. That's what we got to keep an eye on. So I have kind of reinterpreted. I went into the Greek and I looked at I'm not a Greek scholar, but I know enough Greek to be dangerous and creative and imaginative. And so I went into the Greek and I reinterpreted this from the Greek into the English, and I used the Message version, the NLT, and the NRSV as a guide, how did they translate this stuff? But then I was also using Lectio Divina approach of what is this saying about things. So here's my reinterpretation of verses 1-5. Don't be so hasty to seek authority because of its great responsibility and the scrutiny it invites. Not a single soul is perfect, no matter what they say about themselves. If we had perfect control over what we said, you would see it in all of our actions. Because words are like a steering wheel, a small part of the vehicle that sets direction. No need to brag about your accomplishments. We will eventually see them in the repeated patterns of your actions. Okay, I like that translation. That just really brings it home. It gets a little bit fiery after this, a little bit it says a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire, and among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. Its whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body, can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. Dang. People can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil, full of deadly poison. Okay, we just got a little bit fiery on this one, verses 5b through 8. It got a little bit fiery on that one. Fires of hell. So in this culture, it was dry, arid climate. So a small spark can set things on fire and cause large brush fires. Not a lot of forests in this area. There's a few, the cedars of Lebanon kind of a stuff. But they are very familiar with like fires rushing across, like the plains or whatever you want to call them, because it was very dry, arid environment, and a small little spark can cause a lot of damage. And they're using this to like communicate the power of our words, the power of the words, especially of those that we look to lead us and teach us. Their words are very powerful, and it's like a little spark can set a great forest on fire. So a little word, this is what I intended, but not this. In a dry, arid climate, like those words can really set a forest on fire. And when you have a people, or you have a community, or you have a group, and there are all of these like fears and underlying hatreds and underlying racist tones, xenophobia, all of these like fears and guilts and shames that are under the surface that we can't see. And then someone comes around and says something to spark the fear of all that underbrush inside of our souls. That can like catch a forest on fire. It can catch a people on fire. It can catch a whole group on fire, a whole nation on fire, a whole humanity can get caught on fire by people coming around and inciting fear and using all that dry tinder that's in our life of the fears and all that. So words shape our world. We use words to shape our world. And this whole thing, he says, a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire, and among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It's a world of wickedness. The word there for wickedness is actually the word for injustice. But I think religious folks like to use righteous and wicked because it paints clear lines that says, I am righteous. Everyone who is not in my club is wicked. And lots of people do that, not just Christians, all religious groups, political groups, whatever groups. We do that. We're on the good side and the right side, and everyone else who isn't on our side is the bad side. To look at the Greek word there for wickedness is actually the term injustice, which I think is wickedness. It's been used in this real moralistic way of, the people who do those things over there. And really it's the word for injustice, because righteousness and justice are the same word in Greek and Hebrew. We have to remember that. Whenever you see the word righteous in the Bible, you have to think of a society that's ordered in a just manner, like that. That's righteousness. Righteousness is justice. Justice is righteousness, not moralistic, being on the right side of all the social wars of whatever has got you all hot and bothered. That's not righteousness. Righteousness is justice. So the word wickedness here is injustice. And it corrupts the entire body, sets your whole life on fire, kind of a thing. Saying your words have gravity to them. The things we say have gravity because we can wound people with our words and we can heal people with our words. And the higher up you go in having authority in positions of teaching or positions of influence or power, your words carry more gravity. So if you say something to a family member, that has a lot more gravity than if you say it to a stranger. But if there's affiliation, like I look to this person as my teacher, this person as my leader, and then they say something that has a lot of gravity. Those words have a lot of gravity, and it shapes our world into either a just world or an unjust world. And it says that it's set on fire by hell itself. Now, this is a really early book, like 40s, like somewhere in the mid 40s, not 1940s, by the way, just 45, Common Era, AD, whatever one you choose on that one. It's about 45-ish, between 45 and 55-ish, like just a couple of decades after Christ has died. And risen and all that stuff. So this is a really early piece. They're not really concerned with doctrinal purity at this point. James is really concerned about how do we do this? How do we live this Christian thing in our world? Like, tell me what to do and what not to do. So they don't have a doctrine of eternal conscious torment, hell, judgment kind of a thing. and then a heaven. They don't have that dichotomy. A lot of Jews believed in Sheol, the place where all dead went to, and then when you entered Sheol, you just kind of like were there. There was different like layers and levels of Sheol, but you were in Sheol until the resurrection. That's what they believed. The place of the dead, if you look in the Old Testament, especially the Psalms, if you descend into hell, you are there with me. Like that's just the place of the dead. There was no fiery pit with red horned people with pitchforks. That came much later. So what are they talking about when they use the word hell? If eternal conscious torment, lake of fire language didn't exist in this time, the word hell is, we've actually talked about this on the podcast a little while ago with Chad Ball. The word hell there is Gehenna. Gehenna is an actual place outside the city of Jerusalem. It's the Valley of Hinnom. And what happens in the Valley of Hinnom, it was a place where they threw all their trash. And, they lit it on fire. Sometimes it was on fire. And it was like a flame that never went out. So the place for their trash and everything, Gehenna, became known as like the judgment. But not the last judgment, eternal judgment, or going to hell when you die kind of a judgment. It came known as judgment, like if we don't get our act together and keep our covenant with Yahweh, then Babylon's going to come down here and turn this whole city, our beautiful city, into Gehenna. It's going to look like the trash heap out there that's on fire. They're going to do that in here. It's going to look just like that. So it was always like a judgment that's coming from the outside to the inside in the present day. Now, how this place got its name, or maybe not its name, but its reputation, was that I think it was in Exodus. I forgot to write it on my notes, but back in the Old Testament, like the first couple books, I think it was Exodus, there was some people that sacrificed their children to the god called Molech. And it was a heinous practice. And I think, and I'm not sure, but I think possibly the story of Abraham and Isaac comes out of that tradition. I know it's in a book before Exodus, but they were definitely, doesn't have to be written in chronological order to be an oral tradition that existed before things. But this is a guess I have, that the Abraham, Isaac, I'm going to sacrifice my son on the mountain to Yahweh, was kind of like an apologetic against that kind of worship. I know it sounds weird to us modern languages that God would just like rush in the last minute and be like, oh, I was just seeing if you were going to do it. I didn't really ask to do it. It's really weird to modern ears to hear that. But if it is in a culture that there's all these people sending their children to the god of Molech and, sacrificing them to Molech, then yeah, it's going to make a little more sense to them. Like, our God doesn't ask us to do this. We don't have to ask us to do this. But if you look in the modern day, you can go ahead and Google the Molech principle. It's actually a thing that we still do, where we sacrifice the future well-being for short-term gain, because they would sacrifice their children in ancient times so that they would have good crops today. But the problem would be, then they wouldn't have workers on their farm so that they can get the crops resources. They're sacrificing their future well-being, and especially that of their dead children, but their future well-being to get a short-term gain. I will sacrifice my child to get good crops this year, but then next year I won't be able to harvest those crops, or in 5 years, whatever, when my son was at a working age. And so it's to sacrifice your long-term well-being for a short-term gain that costs you in the long run. Good thing we don't do that anymore, right? Well, the Molech principle is seen in the 2008 housing collapse. You gain all this easy money, and the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then pops. We're sacrificing short. It's seen in the Cold War. Let's rush and build up nuclear armaments. That's a hard word to say. Armaments and more and more and more. And now all of a sudden we have the ability to annihilate the entire earth. It's seen in companies that are like dumping toxic chemicals in lakes and landfills because it's cheaper to just do it that way. So you see, whenever we do economic exploitation, somebody's going to have to pay for that. And usually we're all going to have to pay for that because we all live here. And it's whenever the Molech principle is like rushing to the edge of the cliff because you got to beat the other person to get there, but you can't stop before you fall over the edge. Like that's the Molech principle, is like you got to get to the thing, that piece of gold that's at the edge of the cliff, and you got to go faster than the person next to you, and you rush and you rush and you rush, and then you get it before the person, but you can't slow down in time before you go over the cliff. You know, there's a lot of AI alarmists out there that says we need to slow down on AI, we need to regulate AI. That's another Molech principle. Should we just rush and rush and rush and rush and get it so that we get it before they get it? That's a Molech principle. Sacrificing the current thing. That's the word hell. The tongue is set on fire by this greed for more and more and more at the expense of our future well-being. Words can be used flippantly for selfish gain and do a lot of damage, especially by those who lead us and teach us. Then it goes into this weird thing that talks about where, we tamed all these animals, and it's like lizards and fish and birds. I'm like, I never tamed a fish before. I don't know. Maybe it can be done. But it's kind of talking about how the animals have this like natural restraint. You can sit next to a lion. If it's not hungry, it's not going to kill anything. But as soon as it gets hungry, it becomes dangerous, and you're going to not want to be there. Right? Like it doesn't just kill to kill kind of a thing. All these animals have these pecking orders, yes, but they're not decimating the land just because they can, kind of a thing, to try and get ahead. So this comparison of the humans and animals on how we use the world, what we're using the world for, is really interesting. And then it talks about like this corroding influences where what did it say? It's full of it's a restless evil full of deadly poison, like unstable, inconsistent, unsatisfied. Human selfishness and greed is unstable, inconsistent, unsatisfied, always wants more, is destructive. And then it goes into this deadly poison. Like it's, if you get bit by a snake and you don't do anything about it, you're going to die, or you're at least going to be very sick. Or it's like rust on your car. Like if you allow greed and the Molech principle to guide humans' existence, it's like corrosive rust on your car. It's like, I don't need to fix that. And then all of a sudden, like you've rusted off major parts of it. Our words, if they're left unchecked, are corrosive force in the world, breaking down the fabrics of society. I love what Howard Thurman says. He says, our language mirrors the world we want to create. If our words are empty of love, then our world will be void of justice. Howard Thurman, he's my man. So my retranslation of verses 5-8 is this. Remember that it only takes a spark in our dry climate to set a whole forest on fire. Our words, which seem insignificant like a spark, are like that. They can shape a whole world of injustice, turning harmony to chaos, bringing dire consequences down upon our heads. The animals have this better understood than us, and we can tame a falcon, horse, or ox, but not our own untamed speech, which is never satisfied, consistent, or stable, and seems to tear apart and corrode our communities and the world. That is my translation of that. Then it just kind of like in verse 9, it goes, sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this should not be. Does a spring of water bubble with both fresh and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives, or a grapevine produce figs? No, and you can't draw fresh water from a salty spring. This whole idea of like blessing God and then cursing the humans made in God's image is like this thing that James says that can't be. It's like an inconsistency that can't exist in the same space, to bless God and curse humans, because humans are made in the image of the God that you're blessing. So you can, when he says that, blessing God isn't just, saying your hallelujahs, but it's to speak well of God. It's to have fancy religious talk or deep theological talk, philosophical talk. Sounding intelligent, sounding deep, sounding, like airy or otherworldly. We're blessing God. We're talking religiously. But then we look to the humans that are made in God's image, and then we wish evil upon them. We doom them. We denounce them. We curse them. It's like, oh, they're idiots. That is inconsistent, because humans are made in the image and likeness of the God that we bless. So we can't bless God and curse humans. It doesn't work, because it's like looking at yourself in the mirror and saying you're a moron, and then looking at yourself on your phone in a selfie and saying that's an intelligent person. It's like it's like the image. You can't do that. It's like, I love the ocean, but man, I hate water. It's like, that doesn't make sense. I love ketchup, but I hate tomatoes. Like, I know there's some other ingredients in there that make it interesting, but like, there's inconsistencies. Blessing God, cursing humans, they can't coexist. It doesn't work, because God is so tied to the human race, because of the incarnation of that God in the person of Christ, that we can't curse a human and bless God, because that curses God. And we can't bless a human without blessing God, because it blesses God. And it goes into this, like, its illustrations are fresh and salt water. Spring, they got their water not from, wells with electric pumps on them. That didn't work. They had cisterns that held water, rainwater, as it rushed down the mountain. They would catch it in cisterns so they'd have water long term. And then they had like springs, where they would go and get fresh water. They would call it living water. That's a fun one. You can play with that later. But they didn't have plumbing or electrical pumps. And, they had wells, they had springs, they had cisterns. That's how they got their water. And if you pull water out and you drink it and you're like, that's gross. And then you pull water out and then you drink it again, hoping that it's not gross the second time. It's like, it's the same water. It's the same source. It's there. And that would happen. Like, there's natural minerals in the area that would cause something to be extremely bitter. Like the Dead Sea is the saltiest body of water. Well, maybe not the saltiest, because the Salt Lake, I don't know. Salt Lake and Dead Sea, I haven't compared those two, but like the Dead Sea is an example of water that comes down and gathers so much mineral on its way that it's useless you can't drink out of the Dead Sea. And it's kind of bringing our minds back. Remember, they're going to be Jewish, so they're going to be familiar with the waters of Marah from Exodus 15, where the Israelites could not drink the water because it was bitter. And the book of Proverbs tells us that the heart is the wellspring of life, and our life is evidenced. Whatever is in our heart is evidenced by our words coming out. Words show us what's inside, and whether that is anger, whether that is hurt, whether that is sorrow, whether that is joy, whether that is gratitude, you see it in your words. And no one's ever going to, it says nobody's perfect in this area, but your words reveal the things that are in your hearts. If you have fear and like xenophobias, it's going to come out in racism. If you have like trauma and all that, like hurt inside of you, it's going to come out in a certain form of words. You'll see by your words what is in there, and you will see there's nobody's going to be perfect in this realm. But don't expect, when you hear words from somebody who claims to have some kind of authority, and you hear words coming out of their mouth, you can't just say like, it's just words. They don't really mean it. They don't really mean what they're saying. It's like, that's not what our Bible says. Bible says our words are evidencing what's in the heart there. And then it has like figs and grapes and trees and vines and salt and fresh. And it's like, these are different by nature. You can't expect, trees to produce something that vines do, and vice versa. And now you might be thinking to yourself, I'm a quiet person. I don't talk a lot. I'm an introvert. I am off the hook on this because I don't say a whole lot. But that's not true. I'm a little bit introverted myself, and I can be stoic and not at peace at the same time, because we can have an exterior of like, I'm a calm, collected individual, while inside everything is like freaking out on us. So we don't necessarily have to monitor our words. If you're very introverted, you don't talk a lot, you can gauge your soul's temperature not from your words, but from the thoughts that are coming in that you want to say, but don't necessarily make it out. Monitor your thoughts about people and gauge what that says about me. So let's not expect fruits from something that is not in its nature to give. Gustavo Gutierrez says this: language has the power to build or to break. In every word, we either participate in the kingdom of God or contribute to the kingdom of injustice. So your words matter. They matter. The words of the people you look up to lead you, to teach you, to guide you, they matter. They're not just words. They actually matter. So my interpretation of verses 9 through 12 is this. With our speech, we can say, praise God, and then turn around and say, go to hell to a human being that is made in the image that we just praised. We are that inconsistent, and it should not be that way. A spring is either fresh or bitter. A plant will give you either figs or grapes, depending on its nature, but not switch on you. So don't expect fresh water from a mud puddle. Dang. Well, that is chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed this little Bible study for Unfundamentalist folks. We'll have another one on chapter 4 next week. Just moving through, following the liturgical calendar. So I will see you then. Thanks for listening along and joining us on the journey. Peace out.